I'm going to start with my PowerPoint. I'm going to show you a few slides, and then we'll talk about and share our thoughts. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to COVID-19 World News. We are coming to you from Houston, Texas. I have two special guests online, Dr. Vadera and my good friend Bangaur Reddy. Okay, I'm going to touch on some of the highlights of the news in the United States. So today, as you know, we passed more than 100,000 deaths related to COVID-19 pandemic right here in the United States. And of course, the SpaceX program had to be put on hold because of bad weather. Talking about bad weather, we are having a bad weather in Houston and Sugar Land and most of Texas. As you can see, some of the roofs have been ripped off and tornadoes located in some places. And of course, this is a very horrible situation that's going on in Minneapolis, where a person had to lose his life for no reason. Okay, let's get back to COVID-19. And here are the world numbers, 5.6 million people with more than 350,000 deaths all across the globe. And if you look at the number of cases on a daily basis all across the globe, the numbers have been pretty steady at almost like 100,000 for last several days. Only in the last 3-4 days, these numbers have come down, but it is nowhere close to this pandemic coming to end or anything like that. And here's the number of deaths all across the globe. As we can see, there has been a steady decline in the number of deaths, but the number of new cases continue to be pretty close to 100,000 per day. All right, now if you look at the United States, here we have got 1.7 million people who have been tested positive with more than 100,000 deaths. And United States has conducted more than 15.5 million tests. We'll come back and look at these numbers again. I'm just going to go through very quickly and then we'll go back and look at UK. It has almost 37,000 deaths and they tested only like 3.6 million people. And we're going to focus on India also, along with Texas. And in India, as you can see, these numbers are climbing steadily, even though they had a lockdown situation for almost 6 weeks. Let's move on to the next. This is the graph from China. And we're going to use this as a foundation to see how other countries and other states have performed during this pandemic. It started somewhere on January 5th in Wuhan, China. And this is the one which is represented. The yellow dots are the ones which are representing the Wuhan city. And from January 5th to about January 28th, which is just approximately like 2 to 3 weeks, it reached from 1 to almost 5,000 cases per day. And then from there was a steady decline in the number of new cases. Similarly, all across China here, this is a Wuhan. The red one is China without Hubei, and the cyan color is the total number. The important thing we want to keep in mind is it had a very sharp peak because this is a logarithmic scale. It goes from 1, 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000. So during the peak, they had almost like 5,000 cases per day in the Hubei province and other places. So it took like maybe 2 weeks or so for it to go up, but then it took almost from February 4th to almost March 10th. That means it takes twice as long to come down as it takes for the number of cases to go up. That's an important thing we want to keep in mind as we go forward. And if you look at in the United States, we have 1.7 million people who have been tested positive for coronavirus, and we just passed 100,000 deaths. And here is a map of the United States new cases. It has gone down steadily, but still, we are continuing to have almost 19 to 20,000 new cases per day all across the United States. And this is the death chart, which has shown as quite a nice smooth decline, where it has come down to about less than 1,000 deaths per day as of May 26th or 27th. And New York City, which was the epicenter of this corona epidemic in the United States, had 374,000 cases with 29,000 deaths. Actually, New York City had almost 1/3 the deaths in the United States. Okay, and here is the New York City graph, which pretty much sort of parallels the Wuhan and Hubei graph, as you can see here. And it started somewhere on March 8th or 9th. Then it reaches a peak when there are almost like 10,000 to 11,000 cases per day. Then, as I told you, it takes about twice as long for it to come down as it takes for the number of cases to go up. But this is actually on March 22nd is when they introduced the lockdown. That's an important point to keep in mind, because by the time they introduced lockdown, New York City was already experiencing 5,000 new cases per day. And if you look at the death chart, which looks pretty like a nice bell-shaped curve, so the death continues to go down in the New York City area, New York State area. And here is the Texas dashboard, which is our state, of course. They have done close to like 1 million tests. 57,000 or 58,000 people have tested positive for the coronavirus, with a mortality of almost 1,562 for the entire state. And of course, the hot spots are in Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, even Amarillo and Lubbock, for that matter. And here is the chart, which looks a little bit flatter compared to the Chinese graph and the New York City graph, because as you can see, we have a much flatter curve with maybe 1,000, at the most 15,000 cases. But the other interesting point in Texas is it has taken a much longer time for it to level off and to begin to see some drop off. We saw a drop off for last 4 days, but just the previous day, it jumped up to again 1,000 cases. And this may be related to the number of tests that are done, but nonetheless, we have a flatter curve, but the top level has been just continuing for so many days. It started somewhere along like March 16th, and this is almost like 6 weeks or so. And we still haven't seen a steady, continuous decline in the Texas, even though the numbers are not anywhere close to what it was in New York City or in China. And similar story with the deaths in Texas. They are all over the place. It had come down here. And we also had to keep in mind on April 29th, they opened up parts of the business. And again, this week, they opened up more businesses. So for the next 2 weeks, it's important to see how things shape up and where we go from there. So one of the things which I'd like to follow is the number of patients in the hospital. And as you can see, the number of patients in the hospital at the present time is 1,645. And that was reached on April 22nd. So now we are almost like 5-6 weeks into this epidemic in Texas, and the numbers are still holding steady. Maybe Dr. Vadera and Bangar Reddy can comment on this and see, why we have so many hospital admissions and the numbers are not coming down, despite the fact that we are seeing, good improvement in the overall numbers in Texas. Now, a little bit focus on India. As you can see, India has 158,000 cases with 4,500 deaths. And if you look at the graph here, even though India had almost 6 weeks of lockdown, the graph continues to have a steady upslope here. And only in the last couple of days has this shown some decline. As you can see, it was almost 7,000 total cases per day in India. So that's this is drawing on for a long time, and we have to find out how much longer it's going to take for it to level off and then decline. If it took from, let's say, for example, March 20th to end of May to reach the peak, then you talk about leveling off, then it's going to take twice this length in India for the wave to come down to any appreciable degree. So that's, and here are the death rates. And so I would like to just stop the presentation here. Let me stop sharing the screen so we all can, let's see, I'm trying to see how we can. Okay, Bangar.
Yes, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sorry for the Dr. Nik. First of all, we would like to thank you so much for starting your first webinar, giving details that we really needed. I do know that there are numbers coming from different places, and John Hopkins University is the one we always rely upon. And then, of course, your data is more user-friendly so that we can go over each place. So I was analyzing your data, and it looks like we have some similarities in some places, but except we are unable to figure out, as you said, for Texas and as well as for India. And first, to come back to, I think when you talk about New York, the numbers are in tens of thousands, right? And whereas Texas, it is in thousands. And as you said, the population, death count by population is what we need to compare, because every time we say US has crossed 100,000 already, and we are not taking any action about it. Of course, we are taking action. A lot is happening behind the scenes, but you really see, compare that with the other countries, and the US being the most economic friendly country, people travel a lot. And I think the days that they traveled in the beginning days, that has a big impact in New York, which is, of course, counting 30% of the overall death rate. Isn't it, Dr. Nik?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I went through very fast the slides, and once you finish talking, I'll go back to the various countries and show that the United States is not with the highest mortality per million population.
Absolutely. So we have to keep New York into consideration, which has 33%, and then we a situation where what would happen if we the question is whether we need to stay indoors or whether we need to come out. The answer is in India. So answer is, when we lock up India, what happened was, earlier days the count is less, but when you open up, the count has increased. But the issue is, when you really compare it to the million population versus death rate, it is much lower back in India. So what it tells us is, we have to stay indoor at places like heavily mortality rates, but places like Texas, we have to open up. We have to do more for the economic improvement. Otherwise, just imagine, there will be more economic downfall. The problem is going to be, the solution is going to be more problematic than the problem itself.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I mean, we have to balance between the risk of people getting infected and having horrible courses in the intensive care unit, along with the economy, because the economy is also equally important to keep the Texas alive, so to speak. Bobby, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay,
I
go
can.
ahead. Go ahead.
I had it on mute, so it was going.
Okay, go ahead. Let's hear your observations.
Well, I agree with Banga Reddy. I think he hit the nail on the head by saying, yeah, we have a problem, but what do? We continue staying indoors, then we've got one problem. If you go out, you've got another problem. So, and like you said, we got to balance that. So, yeah, I guess we have to pick between the best of both the worlds, and life can't stop, You have to keep going and try to get whatever you can done safely. So, and meanwhile, how do we prevent new cases? How do we tackle new cases? Right now, I know there had been a lot of COVID-19 testing going on, the nasopharyngeal swabs and all, but now I think it is fading away because we're going away from that, and rightfully so, they're doing the antibody testing.
Yeah.
So I think that would probably, that is good for epidemiological reasons. That would tell us how much of the population is infected and how much of the population is prone, susceptible. There are a lot of studies going on about that because I see a lot of places they're giving even incentives to have blood drawn for bodies.
In fact, when New York, they randomly tested 14% of the people they tested had antibodies. And I think in New York City itself was like 21% of the people had antibodies. You see, when we do antibody tests, it could be good news and bad news. If you have antibodies, then you say, you can feel safe. Okay, I don't have anything to worry about, hopefully getting a second infection, but that's not a guarantee. But if we don't have antibodies, then we are starting at ground zero. So I think antibody testing does help. Like, for example, that brings us to the next question. And Bangar already talked about we need to open up for businesses. And how do we safeguard ourselves when we open up for businesses? Let me give, for example, as a doctor, Bobby, you and I have never stopped working. We've been working all through this pandemic. I haven't taken a day of vacation, which is a blessing. At the same time, nowadays, when you go to work, we are greeted by a line of security guards. First of all, we have to have a sheet that shows we don't have any symptoms, we haven't traveled, and things like that. Number two, we have to show our employment badge. After that, they're checking the temperature. When you pass all these things, then we are to enter the parking lot. So I think there are certain safeguards workplaces have to take. Bangar, maybe you can comment on that, and Dr. Vadera, you can comment on, what are the safe things? Let's say, for example, a small business, a restaurant, or a doctor's office, or a small office of 15, 20 people. How do you safeguard from somebody having an infection, something like that?
Coming back to basically what I'm trying to say, Dr. Nik, Texas has already opened up thanks to our governor. Especially I visited a few places, like a restaurant has opened up. They are following precautions. When you go into the restaurant, you have to, first day you park outside near the tent where they look at you and make sure that everything is okay. And you need to park at a designated place and then go inside. I think there are certain guidelines where they need to maintain the 6 feet distance between the tables, and that's happening. So that is about most of the restaurants that are serving inside. And also the outdoor curbside pickup is really happening more nowadays, and that is regarding the restaurants. And coming back to where the real problem is, where we have big buildings. High-rise buildings are going to be the problem that we need to manage properly, okay? And coming back to 6-story, 2-story buildings, and I think the business have opened up, and people are managing in shifts, and slowly I think there is 20 to 30% of the population is already in business at this point.
That's good to know. Dr. Vadera, maybe you can comment on, what do you do when you find out one of the co-workers tests positive for coronavirus?
You said one of the workers is positive for coronavirus?
Yeah, like at the workplace, if you find somebody is positive, how do we deal with this?
Well, people should be encouraged to report any symptoms, self-reporting, and they should avoid the workplace. One thing is they could take temperatures, which they are doing, and I think in some buildings they're even installing those infrared thermal scans. So whereby people can just pass in front of the screen, and it will pull out persons who have a elevated temperature over 100 degrees. So a patient should, if they have any of the symptoms, they should be staying home for at least 72 hours. Now, if someone shows up at work and they find out it is he has a fever issue. Well, I mean, they need to isolate and decontaminate the place. I mean, just like they were doing before. Many big offices and establishments had to be closed in the beginning, and they had to go through the decontamination. Even I heard like Amazon buildings and all, they were shut off for a few days until they all were fully decontaminated, sprayed and all, and then everything wiped out and let people in. I mean, but now recently, like Dr. Bangar Reddy says, the bars and all, they were open, and I haven't been to the bars or restaurants, but I saw on TV where they were not even wearing masks, and they were not even respecting the 25% occupancy. And the bars were crowded the first day when they opened. It could be looked both ways, you know. It could be good news and bad news, okay?
Yeah.
Because the good news, okay, more people get infected, bad, but to one side of the population, it could be good because that's how you're going to develop herd immunity. Like you said, only 14% of the people in New York are antibody positive. The more people get it and more people are positive, like you need up to about 70% of the population to be positive. And if 30% are not positive, the risk becomes much, much less of transmission. The virus will die down because you go to a place and there are more positive people, and if you're negative, if somebody's got the virus, it's just going to circulate in him and die away.
Well, that's the thing.
Hopefully, if his immunity is not lowered and he don't get more advanced to the symptoms.
That's a very important point, because the longer we stay indoors, the less chances we have of getting wider immunity in the community. And it's like a catch-22. You stay indoors, you don't get immunity. You go outdoors, you know, you have a chance of getting infection. I guess we just have to take standard precautions we have been taking all this time, and just go to work and follow the same precautions that we have done for the last 6 to 8 weeks. I mean, that's the best way to deal with this, because this, as I said, is not going to go away in the next 2 weeks or 2 months. It may linger on for several months. Then we'll be into fall season where the flu will start. Then we're going to have, if we have a second coronavirus wave, then it's going to be mixed with the flu. It's going to be much more challenging to, you know, sort out what is flu and what is not flu. In fact, you know, in the hospitals now, they are routinely doing coronavirus tests for every patient who is admitted to the hospital because they want to protect the employees.
Yeah, that is a requirement for...
Look, gentlemen, any final thoughts? I mean, this is our first...
I'll give my final comment. Doctor, a couple of questions. One, as you said, the social distance, washing hands, being responsible when you go to the workplace, following the company rules and regulations related to the pandemic would definitely help, because we cannot stay indoors and assuming that things are going to get resolved for us. We have to be proactive, and we have to wear masks. Definitely, we are not saying that we should not wear masks, and have sanitizer with you all the time. Wash hands, most importantly. But how we can prevent this is, our focus should be isolating people who are infected with COVID, rather than focusing on the people who are not infected. If you want to control the 95% population and 99% of the population is more difficult. Rather, I would focus on 1% population, where we need to isolate and dissect and make sure that they are quarantined as per, you know, what we have been doing. So I think we can do that effectively. We can solve it until we find a vaccine, but we cannot hold 99% of the population indoors assuming that we have a problem. So then what happens is that the solution itself will become the biggest problem than number of mortalities. And of course, we don't want anybody to die. We want zero mortality rate. But imagine if we close the economy for a couple of more months, it is going to be devastating for the country to come back. So those are my closing comments.
Excellent point. You talk about focusing on the people who are most likely to spread the infection and let the other people follow strict self-mitigation guidelines and then do what is needed to be done and return to work. But be cautious. Vadera, your final thoughts?
Well, the same thing. I agree with him. It's more important than this antibody testing that is going on. That will help us move in that direction. We can encourage people more and more and keep a lookout for people who are getting infected. And of course, the people should also participate, especially the ones that are outside. Is through social distancing practice, through mask wearing and all. Some people, the other day, I remember I was walking into a store and there was a person who was ahead of me. He was wearing a mask and he had to sneeze. And the poor guy, he probably didn't know. He took off the mask and he sneezed and then put the mask back on. So I was saying, oh my God. That's right. So they need to know. And then the mask also, how to wear, how to reuse. Because people have to know how to put on the mask and how to take off the mask, Otherwise it defeats the purpose. Like you're saying, it can make it worse. Because they have to know that the outside of the mask is contaminated. And when they remove it, they're touching it all over. To reuse the mask is now this is a true problem, because I'm seeing it where even in the hospitals and all, when we're going, we don't have masks, we don't have gowns. Some of the major hospitals and all, they're reporting that, they're all sufficient. But you go to some other smaller places and all, it's not, they don't have. People have to get their own, and some people have to use and reuse. So how do you use and reuse? We should know that. And how many times can you use and reuse? I cannot keep using the same mask for being in the hospital for 8 to 10 hours and use it all 5 days a week or 7 days a week. So though I try to be careful, I wipe it off with alcohol or I spray Lysol. I try to decontaminate it, keep it outside in the sun, do something with it so that, next day I can reuse it. But all these things, the way public is going to be difficult.
Well, absolutely. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been watching COVID-19 World News. I am Dr. Nik Nikam, your host, and next week we will have another episode of COVID-19 World News, and hopefully we can focus on some other important issues that might help us to better navigate through this coronavirus pandemic. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you.